Medications for opioid use disorders in correctional settings. Shifting the paradigm, creating a balanced correctional and rehabilitative approach. The Opioid Response Network is funded by SAMHSA to provide resources and technical assistance needed locally to address the opioid crisis. This video is part of a series to provide guidance on the implementation of medications for opioid use disorder in correctional facilities. Leading corrections and behavioral health experts present information on topics such as the use of medication, models of delivery, diversion, and linkages to care and community support. In today's workshop, Leslie Bridgman, Carole Dwyer, and Lynne Corry address diversion in a correctional setting.
So, good afternoon.
Oh, is it time?
So I think we're getting ready to start. I do feel the need to stand, I'm sorry, for a second. So, hi, this is a workshop on diversion in a correctional setting. My name is Carole Dwyer, and I'm a warden at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, minimum security. I've been in the department for 29 years. I've been a warden for 17 now.
19,
question,
I
right?
don't know.
I'm not, anyway, for several years, and we're happy to be here to provide this training on diversion.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Bridgman. I work for CODAC Behavioral Health Care. They are the vendor for the MAT program within the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. I've been with the program since 2016 when it was expanded, so I've been there through the implementation up until today. And I oversee the daily clinical and administrative components of the program.
I'm Deputy Warden Lynne Corry. I started the program with Warden Dwyer at Women's and then moved it on to our male awaiting trial facility, and I'm currently at high security. Oh, did we do the disclaimer now?
Yep.
So we know that this is a clinical folks, and if you've never heard us speak before, we will use probably buprenorphine maybe one time because we're not clinical folks. So if we use things like Vivitrol, Suboxone, we don't get any kickbacks. We're really that's just the speak that we use. We leave it to Leslie to talk the clinical speak. So forgive us in advance, and I think we're going to get started. And at any point, if you have just questions as we go along, feel free to just raise your hand. As it happens, it's probably just best to answer it then.
And actually, if we could hold questions to the end, that would be great.
Oh.
Or
just hold them till the end. Because I don't think we're going to have an end. That's
in this room, so we want to hold them until the end.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
So are we standing?
It's up to you.
So we have a few objectives for this presentation for you all. At first, we're gonna describe some firsthand experiences with implementing and adjusting to diversionary tactics within the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. We're going to provide you with some specific examples of diversion, along with some pictures of diverted Suboxone. We're also going to provide some countermeasures that have been taken in response. We're going to also discuss staff attitudes and beliefs around diversion and really emphasize the importance of communication between security and clinical staff.
So we first start with what is diversion, and for the purpose of this presentation, diversion is anybody providing any medication to another individual that's not prescribed or is not intended for them. So this is the third workshop that we've done, and one of the areas that I really would like to caution everybody with is the first presentation we did was line staff. There might have been 15 people in the room. The second one we did was with administration. This third one was with clinical. There was a big void with correctional staff and line staff involved in the MAT programs. And we would like to suggest to you that if you are thinking about getting an MAT program up and running successfully, you really want to include security. Because if you don't include security, it can really hamper and dampen and make it very difficult to get an MAT program up and running. We kind of think of it like this is our house and you want us to do a program and you're not even asking us for some help. So I really would encourage you to welcome security into the program. It's much more effective. I also like to say who's on the program, because if you ever watch any TV, you think all inmates are diverting. And we're here to say that's not true. It's kind of like when you watch TV, if you hear about sex in prison, you think the sex is going on all the time. So the point, if I walk down the hallway, I should see people having sex off the chandelier. Well, that's not true. And stuff, does it happen? Yes, it happens. But I'll also say so is diversion with the MAT program. Does it happen? Yes, it happens. but it's not as rampant as people make you believe, specifically probably what security will make you to believe. There's probably 3 different offenders that are on the MAT program. The first one is those are the individuals that really want to be on the program because they know that without being on this program, they might not survive. And they're on it because they don't want to go through the withdrawal or the cravings or the crashes. They really want to have a normal life so that they can engage in tax-paying, law-abiding life upon release and not overdose. Then we also have the individuals that are on it that are being extorted. These individuals are scared to death and they're probably being extorted by another inmate. We'll use the word inmate and offender back and forth. They mean the same. From a security point of view, that's how we refer to our offenders. It's our job to protect those individuals that are being extorted. The third one is the individual that's there for an enterprise. They're there to make money and they're taking the medication so they can sell to another inmate to make their life easier on the inside. It's really important. Correctional staff will be able to tell right away which one is the inmate that's really on the program for the right reason as opposed to the inmate that's being extorted or doing an enterprise. So it's important that you get buy-in from the security staff.
So why do we need to care about diversion? And I think at its simplest, anyone that works in an OTP knows we need to have those diversion policies in place, and I wish it could just be as simple as that. But there's also, it's very multifaceted. So operationally, we care about diversion because of the DOC's missions, is safety and security. If there is diversion, there's concern that that medication that could often be lethal in someone's hands that is opioid naive, there's that concern. There's also the concern of violence and erratic behavior within the facility that's because of individuals that might be diverting the medication, extorting an individual. Clinically, I think it's important because it helps with the integrity of the program. We know as clinicians that MAT works, but we also know that it works for people that are meant to be on the program. Failing to address diversion, allows individuals that aren't on the program for the right reasons to really take advantage of those resources. But also it sends a message to security. So relationships is another big component to, if you don't care about diversion or there's an assumption that you don't take diversion seriously or prioritize it, it really does send a poor message to security staff that are working on their end, to really minimize those risks. And it's not going to make for a great working environment. You really need to be on the same page together, or the program will never succeed.
In Rhode Island, we offer all 3 types of the MAT medication. Some states only offer 1 or 2, but we're fortunate that we offer all 3. We've been offering methadone for years, specifically for the pregnant female offenders. One, it wasn't for the female offender, it was for the fetus. And it was an advantage to the female offender. We've also expanded to Vivitrol and Suboxone, so we offer all 3 types at this point. Methadone, some of the security concerns we have for methadone is offenders can be really creative at trying to divert medication. A lot of times we found that sometimes the inmates would take the cushioning out of a chair and they would pack it in their mouths. They would take Tampax or anything and put it in the mouth, so then when they're drinking the methadone, they would soak it up and then they can go back and share the medication. How do we stop that? Well, we do really good mouth checks, right? Because diverting can be stopped at the line step by doing good mouth checks. We also found another way the inmates got really creative. They would drink the methadone and somehow or other, I still can't figure it out, but they'd be able to store the methadone in the back of their throat. They would still be able to have a conversation, go up the back of the stairs to their unit, and then be able to regurgitate it. Well, being in corrections and in security is like a cat and mouse game. We're the cats. The inmates are the mice. We want to be the better cats. When they find a way to divert the medication, it's our job to find a way to stop them from diverting. So what I did back at Women's is I would have the offenders eat crackers. So you would drink your methadone, have a seat, eat a couple packages of crackers, and then if you want to divert, have a party, right? Because it's probably diluted so much that it's not going to be of much value to anybody else. But you have to have that give and take so that you'll know what the diversion is and how to combat it. So methadone's pretty easy, though. From a security point of view, methadone is easy to administer, easy to monitor, and easy to stop the diversion.
Sleeping? Are you sleeping? Although we don't have a lot of diversion, we've had to adapt over the years to methadone. So the warden talked a little bit about it, and we laugh about it, right? But that things are diluted, et cetera. But if the offender believes that it can happen, they're gonna try it. That's kind of the premise we have to be under. So in order to do this, to change some things up, some facilities conduct a line before a meal. So it's almost like the cracker scenario. They're about to go in to eat, so it's a little harder for them to hold their breath that long to store it in the back. By the time they get their tray and sit down and try to share it, they're usually out of breath by then. So another facility only serves water or clear liquids at lunchtime, because a lot of times that's just when we happen to give out the methadone. They would spit it into the cup, and because we were serving, let's say, like, you know, grape cool, like, you couldn't tell that it was in there. So, right, most people know that methadone has a color to it, so when they mix it with water, the officer should be able to see it, and quickly. Some facilities with high numbers of offenders on methadone have dedicated methadone lines, so that it could be focused on separately from buprenorphine lines. Other facilities will administer the buprenorphine first and then have the offenders go down and sit and be watched by an officer, and then they administer methadone, so that it can be two separate, it's at the same time, but it'll be two separate areas, so that they can be watched properly to do a proper mouth check. And I don't know if you want to go in the clinical component.
So I think we're fortunate that the diversion issues with methadone are pretty rare, but again, they do happen. They do need to be taken seriously. For those, again, that work in community OTPs, you know that there's mechanisms, you know, with individuals that have take-homes, and you can do callbacks and you know, and check for that and suspend take-homes and increase levels of, you know, treatment. We don't necessarily have those mechanisms on the inside. So, you know, so there are some challenges when we're brought a case of diversion with methadone. Certainly, are we going to have cases where the individual was, you know, found to be diverting their methadone, and there's a question of whether or not, you know, that person's appropriate to be on that medication. What I really want to stress here is don't have a blanket policy. You really need to look at a lot of factors. You're going to have some people that it's pretty clear cut. They shouldn't have been on the medication. They should not be on the medication. And, you know, maybe they don't have opioid use disorder. You're going to also have individuals that you know that they're that they have OUD. You know that they're at risk for relapse. And again, you know, I say by putting my clinician hat on, we know that the goal of the program is to reduce that really high risk of relapse upon release. So there's kind of this balancing of, or you have an individual, you know that they've are at risk for relapse, and now you're presented with this really poor decision that they made. You know, so I really just, you know, stress enough to look at the whole picture, to look at if an individual maybe is better suited to switch to another medication. Although buprenorphine films, again, do present the diversion risk as well. Looking, you know, at the options of naltrexone, whether it be in the injectable or the oral, looking at potentially switching them to a crushed buprenorphine, or also, again, looking at whether or not that individual actually does need to be maintained on it. We've run into a situation where we had an individual that was awaiting trial, and there was a real significant concern given his use that to taper him off and to have him be released at any given point would, you know, really do a lot of harm. So again, it's an open discussion with clinical, with medical, and again, not a blanket policy. It really does need to be looked at the patient as a whole.
So after we get done with methadone, we switch to Suboxone. At the beginning, we know that there's 3 types. So we switched to the pill type. The pill type was of concern to security because we use the standard 16 milligrams for each offender, which means that they get 2 pills. Well, it can take up to 20 minutes for the pills to dissolve. 20 minutes is a long time in a correctional facility and can put a real damper on operations on what's it going to affect the med lines, is it going to affect programming, recreation? So you really got to put some thought into where that 20 minutes is. also to expect correctional officers to monitor somebody for 20 minutes is a long time. You may already be sick of looking at me, and you're not watching me to see if I'm trying to divert a medication. So the pills were creating a problem for security. We also found that if an inmate had partials or dentures, the inmates were able to flick it in and to use diversion and to take the contraband out of the institution. Some of the inmates would be cheeking the medication. They would cheek it up top of their cheeks or below or under the tongue. And again, if not good mouth checks weren't being done, they were able to take it back. We found that some of them, we'd have the offenders walk down a hallway and somehow they'd be able to tuck the chin just right, and they'd actually sew a little hole into the shirt and be able to catch it every time. It's amazing. I was like, how do you do that? But they could figure it out and they could do it. So you have to be really careful. So the pills can create a real hardship on the institution. So I saw that we were starting to lose security pretty quickly, so I went to Dr. Clark. You've all heard of Dr. Clark by now, right? She is the guru of the MAT program in Rhode Island, and said, listen, if we don't do something to change this pill format, we're going to lose security, which means we're going to lose the program. What else is there? So she said, well, we have the film. It's more expensive. The pills are $2 a pill, so it'd be $4 for that, for the 2 pills. The film would be $8 a pill, so it's $16. So it was a pretty significant price jump, but it was much more effective for security because you would put the 2 strips in. We say side by each if you're from Woonsocket, underneath the tongue. And they only take between 6 and 10 minutes to dissolve, which is much easier than if you were having the pill. So security was much happy about that. The problem is the color of the film is almost the same color as our gums. So it's very difficult to, again, look for diversion. So if somebody wants to be a millionaire, if you could just figure out a way to change that color, say to like green or purple or sparkles, so it'd be much more easier to check.
We have not gone to the patent office yet.
No, we have not gone
We
yet.
have not.
We also found that a lot of these offenders are also on a lot of different medications, so their mouths are really dry. So if you put the films on top of each other, they'd be able to huff it, and they'd huff the top one to the top of their mouth that was dry, and they were able to bring that back to the institutions. So we found ways to stop that. One really good things we did is we got a dedicated nursing team to prescribe the medication, because like a correctional officer is a correctional officer is a correctional officer. Not the case. Same as a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. So there takes some skill into to providing these medications. So once you learn the tricks, it's much more effective and quicker. We also found that the inmates would stick. We know with our IDs, we always have the offenders wear their IDs close to the face so we can make sure that it's the right offender in the right face. Well, if it goes by, they would spit the film on their ID. They would spit it on the fingers. They would do anything to try to get back. One of our lieutenants just told us a new trick, which I hadn't heard of, which I have now. They would do a cough, and if they have long hair, they could cough it into their hair. So you have to be really careful on how you administer these medications and where the placement is in the mouth. So the film is easier, but it also has other areas that you have to be concerned with. Security's dream is the injection, the Sublocade. All security would bow down if you would just prescribe the Sublocade. However, it comes with a cost. These are generally, at least in Rhode Island, it's like $1,600 a shot. So very expensive, can create a lot of havoc on your budget. So they're not used a lot, but sometimes we will use them for diversionary cases where we don't want to take the offender off. They still need the medication, but there's such a risk to diverting that we'll consider that. Really easy. We send the inmate to the dispensary. They get a shot in the abdomen, and then they just have to go to the dispensary once a day for at least 2 weeks to make sure that the site hasn't been compromised. And sometimes people, we have been told, we haven't seen it in Rhode Island, but they say that it can be squeezed out and possibly used again and or cut out, which could be very serious. So you would want to monitor to make sure that that medication is given the injection properly and that it's not compromised at all. But it's security's dream.
So of course, right when I get something stuck in my eye, I apologize. It's my turn. So how Rhode Island adapted to the pill form of MAT with some diverting, and the warden touched on some of it, but some of our facilities with lower numbers and higher in security, like our maximum security facility, uses a pill and they choose to crush it. First we started using the pill form, but then when that was starting to get diverted, they went to crushing the pill that still goes under the tongue. So at least if they're going to divert, it is in a less lucrative shard, if you will. Some offenders who were allergic to a film or a certain part of the film were also taking pills at first when we first started in some of our facilities that have larger amounts. The offenders have to remove their partials, which of course speaks to some of the communication piece that medical and security need to talk, because a correctional officer who's doing a mouth check today might not know that offender A has a partial. So that conversation needs to be had because they're asked to remove any partial dentures prior to coming to a medication line. No long sleeves are allowed. As the warden just talked about too with the new hair, although that doesn't affect the pill, they now have to put it up when they come downstairs. We make them drink water after, and when I say drink, we talk about a swishing, not just drinking, to see if anything was put up top, that it's flushed down to the bottom. Obviously, really good mouth checks. You'll do the clinical component after. And to the film, some similar things were done, but we talked about the offender no longer can keep the ID tag here. They are no longer required to, they have to put it back down on the table prior to placing the film in there underneath their tongue. And a lot of these, by the way, diverting tactics is important to note when the warden talked about buy-in, getting your line staff in, came from line staff, and which tells me as an administrator of jail or prison that they are starting to buy into the program. Because let's face facts, the program has to run on the weekends when administration and medical staff aren't around. So to get the staff to buy in is how a lot of these changes took place, which was very important for us and very important, I think, for the program. They moved to using an LED flashlight because let's be honest, you put LED in, anybody change their light bulbs at home, you can see anything from space at that point. So they went to an LED flashlight that they chose to use at the very beginning to check placement somewhere in the middle. And again, these are in larger facilities that have to kind of go on like a conveyor belt with somebody when they go back to the beginning. And then at the very end, the full, complete, thorough is what we try to stress, mouth check. They'll check it between the fingers, so now before you go upstairs, it's you check both sides of the ID, you have to open your fingers, because they used to just check your hands, like, look, I got nothing. And then, of course, you know, they're like an illusionist. They all could go on like America's Got Talent and be illusionists. They could do things so quickly. And so now they have to open up their fingers to show. And of course, we already talked about the sublocade being that last step for diversion for people who divert multiple times and have been confirmed. Mm-hmm. You want to get into the clinical?
And so again, yeah, we definitely, even as clinicians working inside corrections, like the sublocade, but again, by the cost, where we've really started to use that the sublocade injection is for those individuals that are chronic diverters that there's they're not making great choices, but there is documented opioid use disorder. We know that they're at risk for relapse. And we've either tried other medications or the other medications it's clear that they're not the best fit for that individual. Now that, and I know the deputy had touched upon it, now as a program and as a department as a whole, we're moving towards crushed buprenorphine in all of the facilities, cost effective, does decrease that diversion risk, but operationally will be a nightmare in some of the facilities. We started it again at the maximum security facility. The numbers were smaller there. There was a little bit more time to manage that. And we're slowly now working into some of the other sentence buildings. But we're worried about how we're going to make that work in the men's awaiting trial building, where we've got numbers over 50 a day. And to me, I think that's where it's going to make the biggest impact. I think that's where security is really going to appreciate and respect that move. But again, we're looking at this impacts operations. This potentially impacts staffing, security staff, nursing staff. We're talking about how quickly we can get the medication out, how long does it take to crush this medication. So really what I'm trying to get at here is the need to be flexible, adapt. If you notice that as a vendor, we went from providing the pill to the more expensive film to now we're circling back to the pill, but with crushed, but with, just a little tweak to it. And in the past, what you can see here is we had kind of operated, again, it was not a blanket, all or nothing, but we tended to operate on, if there was a suspected buprenorphine diversion that was not, there wasn't maybe a lot of evidence towards that. Oftentimes, again, the medical provider would counsel the individual, usually give a warning. There'd be, explicit instructions about properly taking the medication. Since, and I will say, security on the DOC's end, anyone that's in these med lines, they know what to do and what not to do. They know the expectations from the get-go, because I think in the beginning, some suspected cases of diversion, maybe if there were 5, maybe 2 of them, or 3 of them were people that didn't know the correct way, didn't know to raise their hand if they needed more time, didn't know that they, not to move the medication. So that education, I think, component has helped as well. And oftentimes, again, if there is that documented case of diversion with buprenorphine, we will offer a change in medication. To methadone, to the oral naltrexone, and then the Sublocade injection, but also the crushed buprenorphine, because we understand that, people are on medications for various reasons. So, again, to switch someone to a medication that might not be the best fit for them, we're looking at the risk for overdose upon release.
So another one that security really likes is the Vivitrol, because it's really easy. We found a very low percentage in Rhode Island of inmates that are on Vivitrol, although Lynn and I have gone to other states to do training for states. In some states, that's all they offer is Vivitrol. And you know what? Better than nothing, right? So any medication is better than no medication. But the problem with, not the problem, but one of the issues with Vivitrol is it also can be very expensive. And if you put an offender on it, they may not be able to continue it on in the community. And then that's just not really fair to the offender and to the program if you're giving an inmate medication and they can't continue it upon release. So then we always fight with the issue of which medication works best. And we say...
Whichever ones they're going to take. So again, aside from, barring any significant medical, issue that might prevent someone from being on one of those medications, significant cardiac issues, we really want, it's patient preference at this point. If an individual is not going to take, has no intention of taking methadone in the community, why are you going to put them on methadone on the inside? If an individual has a lifestyle that doesn't allow them to go to an OTP every single day. They're a fisherman and they're out on a boat, 2 to 3 weeks at a time. Why are we going to put them on a medication that we know they're not going to be able to continue on the outside, again, setting them up for failure? Because we offer all 3 FDA-approved medications at the RIDOC, it allows us to be able to really find the medication that's going to work best for them. Someone comes in, is insistent that they want to be on methadone, and they start that and then over time realize that this just isn't working for them, they can have that conversation with the provider, because there's 2 other medications. The same thing being that I come in from the community and I'm with an OBOT provider in the community, and I realize that this arrest was because I'm not taking my my buprenorphine. I'm selling it. I'm taking it one day, using the next. I'm really not. I'm manipulating the system. You can meet with a provider and again, explore your treatment options. So I think that's something that we're really lucky that we're able to really offer patient choice, which I think helps us with our outcomes out in the community.
Some of our responses to MAT, we assume if the inmate is not following the protocol for the MAT program, they are diverting. If we think you're diverting, you're going to be held accountable for it. When we say think, there has to be some evidence to support it. If you are trying to divert the medication, you will be booked for it. You will be held accountable. You could do 21 to 30 days in disciplinary confinement. So what you don't want to do is have a sneeze right when you put the film in your mouth, or have any movement to your face. So it's really important that the offenders know that we take this program seriously. This program is for you. We buy into it. We want it, but we won't tolerate any type of misuse or abuse of the program. If we do find an offender that we believe is diverting, there's a conversation with medical. There may be some conversations that medical or clinical will have with the inmate. We may lower the dosage because, again, if you're giving away medication, theory is then you must not have needed it. unless you're being extorted, of course, and stuff. So they may look at tapering it off, switching the type of medication you're on. A lot of times security wants their pound of flesh. If we catch you diverting, we want you taken off it. Well, that's not the case because, again, the object is, as Leslie said, is that we want to save lives upon release and don't want these individuals overdosing, but we may have to put them on a different medication. It's really important for medical and security to have good conversation. A lot of times everybody thinks everybody knows what's going on, but you only know if somebody tells you. A classic case that we had a few months ago was security went to Dr. Clark and said, this is the 5th time this inmate is diverted. What are you going to do about it? And she's like, this is the first time I've heard about it. You know what I mean? So if there's not good communication between security and medical to talk about these diversion cases and what we can do to combat it together, it can be a real problem. Now, even though this individual may go to a disciplinary confinement unit, they'll still continue on the MAT program unless and until medical decides to change something differently from it. So it just becomes a little more complicated for security. We also say that leadership is a buy-in. I also say not only leadership, but line staff. One of the areas that we had of concern in Rhode Island is we did not train our line staff at the beginning, so we didn't have buy-in and they didn't understand. Security is really funny. We're good soldiers. We'll do what we're told, but we can jump on board a lot quicker and easier if we know why. So just tell us why, and then we'll help make it succeed if we believe our voices are heard. So if nothing else, please make sure there's communication between clinical and security to make all of our jobs that much easier to provide for. And then based on your building and whatever your procedures are, develop a building-specific procedure so everybody is held to the standard and the consistency of what we expect. One of the other areas that we didn't do well when we started is we didn't have a code to capture if we had any diversion. Because at the beginning, again, I was the warden at women's facility for 15 years. I know for a fact that the awaiting trial inmates were bringing in Suboxone to try to avoid detoxing over the weekend. They'd get arrested on Friday, wouldn't go back to court on a Monday, and they would go through the whole detox protocol, and they didn't want to do that because it was very painful. We didn't capture the documentation, so I can't prove it, but my gut tells me from doing it for a long time that we did slow down the diversion coming in. Of course, the sell I had to do to correctional staff for years and years and years, we said, we won't allow Suboxone in, we won't allow it in, but now we're actually offering it. So it takes a pretty good sale. Now there's still the enterprise going on. We still have to be careful about mail, people trying to mail it in for an enterprise, being brought in by visits or other ways, but for the program, we feel we have a really good control and people are conveying contraband in to stop the detox protocol. One of the other things that we need to get better at, women's facility does it really well now, is that we don't train our inmates on what to expect if they're on the program. If you're on the program now, you need to be told exactly what we expect, how you take the medication, how you sit, don't put your hands by your face. You need to understand that if the medication isn't dissolved under the tongue on the pill, it really has no effect. So if you swallow and think you're going to regurgitate it and give it to somebody, it's not going to have its desired effect. Also, a lot of times people don't, some people may not realize that with the Suboxone, if you use opioids, you're not going to get high from it. You would get high from it if you're not an opioid user, but if you're an opioid user, it's not a high, it's a normalcy to keep you maintained. But again, if you don't tell people, they think that it can be an enterprise. So I think a training component would be very helpful for the program.
To kind of go back to the communication piece, there needs to be communication again between clinical and security, but really there needs to be something that's set in terms of a regular scheduled meeting that's really like multidisciplinary. In Rhode Island, each facility runs triage meetings, which consist of medical providers, mental health providers, captains or lieutenants through security, and they talk about problem cases. So that's a great opportunity to have everyone at the table. One recommendation I would make is that if you're talking about issues with MAT and MAT med lines, is to have those officers or that captain or lieutenant who's in charge of that med line to be there, because they're the ones that are in the trenches and seeing that. But the communication piece, it really needs to be made a priority. When the program first started, we had scheduled meetings that were, every Tuesday morning, and it was regardless of who could come. Those meetings were there because it was an opportunity to discuss what was going on and kind of address those issues in real time. And I think that's something that's important too. Is with diversion, there has to be the communication, but it also has to be in real time. It's really hard to address a diversion issue 3 weeks after it happened. It's really hard to have any kind of like effect or impact. And again, also we want to know, because if an individual is truly diverting and isn't taking that medication, we want to make sure that they don't end up in restrictive housing where they're forced to take the medication, and now that's a medical issue. So again, the importance of communication being in real time and having meetings with multidisciplinary staff.
Oh, it's the chandelier. So the chandelier that the warden talked about, the chandelier of diversion. So we did start to capture diversion of medication in general, but specifically diversion of of the three options that we have, I guess the two, that would be diverted. So there was only 20 confirmed cases of diversion, the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, in 1 year. Minimum, it's a typo, minimum has 0. Congratulations, ma'am. And added to women's, it was just a typo. So women's has 4. So women's in our intake are our waiting trial and probably our highest volume of people on the program. And so this is some of the cases that we talked about, how we've caught and try to adapt. And next to it is just what we offer currently in those facilities for buprenorphine. And why we put this picture, which I know is very, very hard to see. So a lot of times staff, when we talk about an education component, didn't know what the difference was between Suboxone that was conveyed into the institution from commitment or mail or visits to what was actually part of the program. So the top half, there's 2 things I'd like to point out. Just if you ever get a chance to look at it, we can put it up later too if you want to get closer. It's obviously very mangled and gummy, and it's important to let your security staff know that. But the one thing I do want to point out that we started to learn that they are doing is, so up above there's a pink piece of paper, which is a sugar packet. And what the offenders have started to do is take their Suboxone film from the program. Once they get it diverted, if they actually succeed, they'll take it upstairs and they'll press it inside of a sugar packet, which for the women in the room kind of acts like, the oil blotters that we have, that we, when we get nice and shiny and we want to oil it, so it takes the moisture out of the Suboxone strip, so it almost sometimes comes out looking like it was actually conveyed, because they put it in a book and they flatten it, and sometimes they'll sleep on top of the book, but which flattens it even more. So just as an interesting aside, we've just started to see now that they're starting to dry it out, flatten it in a book. This actually came out of a law book, to be honest. They're right on top of their game. And at the bottom, obviously, it came from commitment. What you can't see is their pills and there's money. That all came from one person coming in at commitment, which at this point, now that Rhode Island realizes that we give it to anyone who has an opioid use disorder, it's probably somebody who was coming in as an enterprise at this point. Things to consider if you're for an MAT program to deter diversion. So obviously time, and this is more for security, but clinical folks should be mindful of this if you're trying to operate inside of a prison, that it's not just, here, I'm going to prescribe some medication and it's just going to happen. So what is best for security has to be considered, what time is best for them, medically required. Where in the facility is it going to be dispensed? And I know that we have different types of words that we use, but are you going to do it in a dispensary area? Are you going to do it in the module, the living area, the visiting room? It all depends on where you want to do it, that you're going to have to put up, put up security protocols in place to deter it. Based on the volume of the program and the security level, you have to think about whether you have 60 people on a Suboxone film at one time versus 6. Staffing, so we put up a ratio. I don't even know where we got the ratio, but it's important that you know, based on the type of medication that you offer, that you make sure that you have people watching, whether it's on either end of the line, or there's people that the people that are administering it and security that's going with them is not the same people that watch them. Because after it goes and you keep going, you need to have people left behind that are making sure that their hand doesn't come off the table or that their tag doesn't come across their face. Go ahead. From the process, like who does the mouth checks? You'd be surprised, we've gone around the country and people think medical does it, medical thinks that security does it. We would argue that it is a security function because the whole point of us doing diversion rather than a clinical perspective is to make sure that the institution is safe and secure and free of things that aren't going to be given to people that are not prescribed it. And I'm only speaking fast because I got the Oscar wrap up, so bear with me.
Did we get a time?
Yeah, less than 5.
Medication type, obviously it depends on what you're administering and how quick that goes and what that looks like to consider. We just want to point out too that we had to take things off the commissary based on some diversion. So right now at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, Jolly Ranchers are no longer allowed. I know that's very sad. It was an uprising about it. I think we're still answering grievances as a result, but because they were using the Jolly Ranchers for diversionary purposes with their MAT. So we take that seriously, so the Jolly Ranchers went away. I can't get rid of sugar packets or else I probably would. And the operational impact we talked about, this, for a provider, you spend a minimal amount of time with people but it has to go on and it has to continue like we talked about even on the weekends. And I think to speak to that communication, again, clinical providers will see somebody for tops an hour maybe. That's probably being generous, as many as you guys see. Correctional officers see them 24 hours a day, at least at an 8-hour block. So they can see their behavior, they know what they're getting into, they know what's happening, and they can provide, through a triage mechanism, a lot of information for your clinical assessments.
And so to wrap it up, we're in the home stretch.
Yep.
I'll say I don't know all of your mission statements, but I would like to say I'm not a genius, but I would like to say you probably have all these 5 components.
You are a genius. Man.
1, you're concerned about the safety and security of your institution. The MAT program works that. Staff development, that's what we're doing here. It's important to develop your staff so that they understand what the program is. Programming, all institutions are required to provide programming, especially to reduce the criminogenic needs of offenders so that they can become law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. And almost every agency now is the reentry is the focus, and the MAT program fits in nicely with the reentry program. But last but not least, I'd like to say some other things that the MAT program helps with security purposes. You see less violence and aggression in the institutions. If offenders aren't looking for the next high or looking for the drugs, and their behavior becomes more predictable so that you can manage the offender properly. There's less conveyance of drugs and narcotics into the institution. You have a cleaner environment. We've all seen what those areas look like that individuals are detoxing. It's not pretty. It's not pretty, and it's not good for the offender, and somebody's got to clean that up. All right, so for a cleaner environment for everybody, the offenders and the inmates, less disciplinary infractions, there's less fights, there's less arguments, safer for all staff. And I'd also add in inmates by use of the MAT program. We need to be mindful of the dosage. If the dosage isn't appropriate, especially if the offender's on methadone, you don't want to see the inmate nodding off and triggering other offenders. So it's important that the inmate is medically provided the proper dosage. And a lot of times we'll talk a lot, especially security and programming, which one's better? You can have good security to have good programming, or good programming to have good security. I'd like to offer you can't have one without the other. It's important for any programming in any security institution to work well together and to communicate well so that these programs can be effective. Because let's face it, the bottom line is when these individuals get out into the community, we do not want to read them in the paper about another individual that's died because of a heroin overdose.
Technical assistance is available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorder. To request technical assistance, visit opioidresponsenetwork.org.